Have you ever listened to a river flowing and wondered, why does water always find its way back to the sea, the river, and time? When water remembers the way home to the sea, is an invitation for you to step into a story where nature whispers in the language of physics and geology. It is not magic or some mystical memory, but gravity, the shape of the riverbed, the memory of rocks and soil, and the meandering bends that record the passing years. 15 minutes before sleep, we will walk along the Mississippi, hear the silt tell human stories, watch Oxbow Lake slice through time, and understand why the current can find its old paths amid chaos. You will receive a scientific bedtime tale that stirs your own memories. If you find it helpful, please subscribe to support the Smart Sleep channel. I'm going to tell you a long, very long passage, like a slow evening breath, so you can listen while your eyes gently close. Together, we'll wander into the first idea, the river as a moving memory. Imagine you're sitting by a gentle stream, the breeze only lightly tugging at your sleeve, and every sound has softened. And then the story begins. When scientists say a river has a memory, they are not trying to personify nature childishly. They are trying to express something much deeper. Every river preserves in its very shape a story, a journey, a diary we can read with the naked eye if we know how to look. The curves, the bends, the abandoned depressions left behind in the floodplain, all are like letters the river has written to time, little by little, over thousands of years. And when you look at them, you don't just see flowing water, you see memories in motion. Imagine the water beginning its journey from a very distant place, sometimes high up in cold mountain ranges, where the first melting ice droplets seep into rock and soil and flow down into streams. From there, streams join to form rivers, and rivers grow larger with every tributary. Like a child growing up, stepping out, colliding, changing. That water does not flow in a straight line. It meanders like a soft brush stroke. Each time it changes direction, it leaves its mark on the land. When a river bends sharply, it leaves behind its former curve on the ground. That abandoned curve will later be cut off and become an Oxbow Lake, a place the river once passed through, once embraced, and then let go. And those scattered Oxbow Lakes across the plain are the river's ancient journal pages. They lie still like sleeping memories, but with just one look, one immediately understands that the river once lived a different life. Geologists and hydrologists, when studying rivers, often say that the flow remembers the influences upon it, because every grain of silt, every layer of sediment it carries, is a clue to where it has been. That is why, when they drill down into the soils of an old river channel, they can find traces of floods from centuries ago, even signs of how the climate has changed. We can imagine the river as a slow storyteller, speaking sentence by sentence in the language of silt, each sentence holding information about long, stretched-out years. What is precious is that the river tells its story in a way that never hurries, drop by drop, year by year, without any rush. It speaks with the patience of nature, and when you lie down and listen with a quiet mind, you will realize that the water, in its own way, is remembering. If you look from above, through satellite images or from an airplane window, rivers like the Mississippi appear like soft ribbons drawn across the land. On that vast surface, you can see old curves, circular arcs that the main channel has left behind. They resemble faded footprints still present, reminding you that the river has never traveled straight throughout its history. Some bends look spontaneous, but in fact are the result of gravity, flow, velocity, erosion, deposition, steady physical laws. And it is exactly that steadiness that shapes what we call memory. When we say that water recalls, it sounds poetic, but science explains it in a very rational way. A river tends to return to old positions because its former channel had favorable conditions: softer soils, lower elevations, and more natural flow directions. When the current is strong, it erodes the outer bank of a bend and deposits on the inner bank. This process repeats itself, twisting lightly like a dream, changing with each breath. But if a major flood comes, the river may break its old path and open a new one. Even so, when it forges a new course, it still leaves behind the traces of the previous route. Like someone moving into a new house, but keeping old photographs on the shelf. The memories remain. Many studies in the Mississippi Valley show that this river has changed course hundreds of times since the last ice age. And yet, strangely, every time it shifts, it often moves within an old range or returns to positions that existed thousands of years before. This has led scientists to say that rivers have long-term memory. And for older listeners, that story feels familiar, because humans too have pathways in their minds, places they once walked, once loved, once left, and sometimes they also return to sit there for a while, if only through memory. Imagine on some peaceful night, you place your hand on the surface of the water. You feel a gentle coolness, a subtle motion, and you seem to hear a whisper beneath. It is not a voice, of course. It is the sensation of a current that has passed through many human lives, witnessed many generations, many changes in the earth and sky, and is now continuing its endless journey. The water does not speak, but it tells a story. It tells it through its flow, its branches, its layers of silt that once covered entire ancient civilizations. You don't need to understand everything. You only need to listen slowly. Scientists love to study oxbow lakes because they are like snapshots of the past. There, they find sediment layers laid down year after year, each layer a cross-section of history. They can see which years had great floods, which years saw low water, and which years the land changed because of climate shifts. These lakes are not just leftover water. They are nature's enormous photo albums. And on a quiet night, when you listen to stories about them, you will feel as if someone is opening each page, placing each picture gently before you, and each image is something you want to gaze at for a long time. The river's memory does not lie only in its shape. It is in everything it carries. Water can bring silt from distant mountains all the way to the river's mouth. It can carry pollen from plant species that have gone extinct, minerals from deep rock layers, and even traces of human activity from thousands of years ago. With modern analytical methods, scientists can find such signs in a small amount of water. This makes the story of the river remembering the way to the sea not just a beautiful image, but a profound truth. Water retains what it has touched. Please think of this. When a river flows through any land, it leaves a part of itself behind and carries a part of that land away. This exchange is continuous, gentle, quiet, just like how our memories are formed. Every experience, every encounter, every moment leaves a tiny imprint in the mind. We do not remember everything, but we carry with us what has touched us. The river is the same. And then, when you picture that current flowing toward the sea, you see more clearly the meaning of the phrase, "Water remembers the way." Not because the water was once at sea and wants to return in some emotional journey, but because natural laws guide it to the lowest place, where it merges with the vast ocean. But in a quieter sense, We might say the water carries within it a kind of orientation of its own. It is not in a hurry. It does not lose its way. It flows as the earth taught it from the beginning of time, and that is what makes the river feel like an old soul, knowing where it is going, knowing where it has been. When you tell this story to listeners aged 45 to 90, you know there is a deep resonance. At that age, people have passed through many bends in life. They have their old pathways, the places they once visited and left. Memories once vivid, then faded. Hearing about the river, about the memory of water, they will feel some part of themselves being gently called back, not to stir sadness, but to invite peace. Like the river, memories never completely disappear. They simply change form, lying beneath the silt of time, and with a single quiet moment, they softly surface. At this point, you can imagine some evening when you lie listening, and your mind slowly drifts along the story's current. You hear the imagined sound of water, see the gentle curves of the river like slow eddies, then see oxbow lakes as silent fragments of life. You suddenly realize that humans and rivers are not so different. Both leave traces, both change, both find their way through bends, both carry their stories along. In recent research, scientists have even found ways to use mathematical models to predict where a river will meander in the future. This makes us understand even more that the river's memory is not only about the past, but also oriented toward the future. The paths it has taken are the basis for predicting where it will go next. That turns the river into a beautiful image of continuity, past, present, and future, bound together like three slow layers of sediment, laid one atop another. In the slow breath of the evening, when your eyelids are beginning to close, hold on to the image of the river as a film reel that never stops flowing. Each bend is a recollection, each deposit is a new story, each abandoned curve on the floodplain is a quiet mark of love from time, and the water, in its own way, is remembering the sea. Now, just let these thoughts drift as softly as the sound of water touching the bank. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, stay close to Smart Sleep. I will always be here, every night, to tell you more gentle things about this earth. In the earlier section, we listened to ancient meanders telling stories of water's old paths. But a river's memory is not only written on the surface. Now, gently close your eyes, then tilt your ear toward the depths, to where old rain, old snow, and underground veins keep the river's breath alive. As you lie still, blanket pulled up to your chest, the clock in your home in Ohio or Oregon ticking steadily like falling drops. The river out there somewhere keeps whispering, even after many days without rain. For hydrologists, this is no miracle, but a form of memory. The memory of soil, of sand layers, of limestone, and of tiny pores between grains of earth, all joining to form a quiet archive that slowly returns water to the main channel. They call that hidden contribution base flow. It is the long, steady breath that keeps the river's heartbeat from stopping in the pauses between storms. Imagine the late autumn storm had passed a week ago. Pavement dry, oak leaves rustling underfoot. Part of that rain rushed over the surface, hurrying to deliver its message to the river like an urgent telegram. The rest, more discreet, slipped past roots and pores in the soil, seeping down inch by inch, foot by foot, gathering in aquifers. In that cool darkness, last night's hurried water is unraveled into a slower rhythm, and when the river thirsts, it returns through seeps and springs in the riverbed, like small streams within the larger stream. That is how memory works. It does not store sharp images, but stores rhythm, duration, the feeling of a season past. On distant mountain ranges, snow-bright Rockies, solemn cascades. The winter snowpack is also a kind of cold memory. Each snowflake is a white page holding the handwriting of storms. When spring arrives, those pages melt, the letters blur into water, flowing into tributaries later, gentler, like a retelling. People in the Columbia River Basin understand this in their own way. Snow held at high elevations is not just holiday scenery, but a promise for April and May, for apple orchards, for spinning turbines. Along the Mississippi, the term base flow sounds technical, but you've met it in real life. Shallow wells that still hold water at the end of summer, streams in Missouri forests that refuse to fall silent after long dry days. All this is because old rain, passing through the soil, left part of itself in storage, then returned it to the main stem when the sun seemed to have burned everything dry at the surface. Science gives many names to that ability to remember: the residence time of water in a basin, the soil's capacity to infiltrate and store, surface roughness, grain structure, thickness of the unsaturated zone, and those concepts that sound almost literary: the hyporheic zone, the outer flow region where river water and groundwater mingle beneath rolling gravel. That zone is like the porch of an old house. Rain blows in and lingers, dripping long after the storm has passed. Scientists who grew up by the Connecticut or the Susquehanna sometimes capture this with correlation graphs, showing how many rivers remember their rainfall patterns for weeks, even months. On the chart, memory appears as the long tail of a curve. The longer the tail, the more enduring the memory. But if you fold that chart and hold it close to your ear, it becomes the sound of steady breathing. That bass flow on sleepless nights is the thin lullaby between the louder noises of weather. To speak of memory without mentioning soil would be incomplete. The ground beneath your feet, be it the black loam of the Midwest, the coastal sands of the Atlantic, or the red fields of Oklahoma, has countless temperaments. Some soils open themselves, letting water pass like an honored guest. Others close tight, forcing water to turn away in search of another path. Fine clay, with its tightly bound particles, lets water in slowly. Coarse sand, full of voids, lets it through quickly. Between those extremes lies a full spectrum, and beneath the topsoil are aquifers, broken rock, porous limestone, fractured basalt, each a library with its own system of memory. In Texas, the Edwards Aquifer feeds springs like Comal Springs, so streams keep singing even on dry days. In Florida, the karst system is like a giant stone sponge. Water wanders through underground caves and suddenly wells up into springs, painting round pools bright blue among pine forests. Everywhere, the river is like a storyteller, inheriting the notebooks of generations of groundwater. So what makes this memory long or short? Part of it is basin size. The wider it is, the more places there are to infiltrate, the more aquifers to entrust. Part is climate. Where winter snow is deep, winter's memory stretches into spring flows. Where rain falls evenly, memory spreads thin and rarely bursts. Where hot winds and evaporation are strong, memory is erased at the surface, but slips deeper underground to find shelter. And in drought years, the soil can briefly forget how to take in water. Its surface hardens, the first rains of the season run off quickly, unwilling to stay. That is the dark side of memory. Memory can also be a scar, but nature, like a wise elder, turns scars into lessons. After a few rains, the soil structure softens. Roots reopen tiny passageways. Microorganisms awaken little paths. And water begins to return to its slow rhythm, the rhythm of base flow. There are nights when you open the back door in Pennsylvania, see the yard washed in white dew, and suddenly wonder, how is the river still so full? The answer is patience. Water patiently infiltrates, soil patiently holds, aquifers patiently cradle, and the river patiently waits, like a lifelong friend who knows that whoever goes far will one day return. In science, people also talk about bank storage. When a flood passes through, high river levels push water into the banks. Like a deep inhale, as the flood recedes, bank water seeps back. An exhale, feeding the base flow, softening the echo of violence. Sometimes, weeks after a flood in Kentucky, people still see damp seepage lines on the banks, drops gathering at willow roots. Just as after a harsh memory, a person needs time to breathe evenly again, the river too needs time to exhale, to regain balance. Beneath the riverbed, the hypoheic zone is where memory and the present blend. Surface water, fast and forgetful, sweeps past rough cobbles. Groundwater, deep and slow, mineral-rich, gentle, seeps through tight gaps. At this meeting place, microorganisms work like librarians. They break down, bind, store, and return. Some dissolved substances enter, are held or transformed, then released more slowly, cleaner. Thus, the river remembers not only quantity but also quality. It self-adjusts within limits, like a storyteller who knows to leave out the noise and keep the important lines. And then there is snow. Snow is the seasonal memory of the mountains. Anyone who has driven over the Sierra Nevada in January has seen those white walls along the road. They look silent, but they are a vast archive of atmospheric moisture. The idea of snow water equivalent is like reading the page count of a frozen book. When spring's sunlight unzips the spine, the pages open, one by one, and the words pour out as meltwater. Thanks to this, Western US rivers, even after long dry spells, are still nourished by base flow, marked with winter's signature. Of course, not all memories are immutable. Reservoirs, like exclamation points in the river's story, interfere with its rhythm of recollection, sometimes helping, sometimes disturbing. If carefully operated, dams store water when it is abundant and release it when scarce. Like a custodian who respects the story and does not drown out its voice. But if handled clumsily, the remembering rhythm is chopped apart, odd surges forced in, and the river becomes harder to read. Here, science is not opposed to memory. It is the art of listening and adjusting, so that base flow, the lulling part, does not get suffocated. Now we return to the house, slowly sinking into the night. On the shelf, maybe you still keep an old glass jar that once held your mother's or grandmother's peach jam. Imagine filling it with clean sand, then pouring water on top. At first, the water pools, not slipping through, but soon tiny bubbles escape, and the water begins to vanish into the spaces between grains. Pour more, and it spills over the rim that is surface runoff. The portion that stays in the jar is memory. A day later, tip the jar, and water seeps out slowly. That is base flow. This image is, in essence, an enlarged portrait of a river basin. Beneath the cornfields of Iowa, beneath the wheat of Kansas, a whole world of quiet voids is storing. All it takes is a slight tilt in time, and memory murmurs out. The hydrologist numbers the percentage of base flow in annual discharge, mean residence time, the slope of recession. Curves all try to say something profoundly human. Persistence. At any age, we understand the value of persistence. It is not flashy, not theatrical, but it carries families through winter, trees through drought, rivers through dry skies. Perhaps that is why the sound of the river at night, no matter how distant, has such an old, comforting quality. It reminds us of what does not abandon us. And if, on some night, you worry about an uncertain, changing future, remember that a river's memory is not stubbornness. It is flexible, able to learn and adjust. When forests are restored, when soil is covered, when wetlands, the natural water matrices are brought back, good memories are reinforced. Rain falls gently, infiltrates deeply, base flow increases, floods soften, droughts lose some of their bite. Wetland restoration projects in the Midwest, the return of native grasses in the Great Plains. All these are ways communities write kinder pages into the basin's memory. In this slow storytelling, perhaps your eyelids have begun to grow heavy. Let the river's voice finish the rest. Think of a small stream in Vermont, thin ice laid over it, with water still moving beneath, touching stones, mingling with groundwater, keeping warm through very slow motion. Or think of a desert river in Arizona, shallow here, deep there, but above all, dotted with clear springs where groundwater rises. Like memories flashing through the sand, these memories line up like beads, falling quietly through time, just enough for your fingers to find a gentle sleep. And tomorrow, when you wake, maybe the rain still hasn't come. Maybe the sky is still dry, but somewhere, beneath the grass, beneath your floor, beneath the road you'll walk, water is still seeping. The river, thanks to that, still flows. It flows like a story once told, being told, and yet to be told, the story of the memory of soil, of seasons, of stone, and of us, ourselves, those who always keep a little love for the next day. At that point, science and sleep shake hands. Dry laws turn into lullabies, and if you are still awake enough to hear one more beat, remember, each soft step on damp grass, each tree you plant, each garden where you let leaves rot into humus, all add a beautiful line to the basin's memory book. Then, when you close your eyes, the river will read the rest. In the cadence of bass flow, slow, warm, and deeply familiar. My dear friend, tonight, when the house is quiet and the windowsill clock has slowed like a resting breath, let us listen to the imagined water beyond the frame. For every river carries its own clock, a clock without hands, without chimes, calling out the seasons with its water levels and flow speeds. To hydrologists, that clock appears as gentle curves traced across time, spring rising, summer drooping, autumn flat and dull like a page read too often, winter slow, like an old hand smoothing out a memory. They call it the seasonal hydrograph. But tonight, we may simply call it the river's breath. In the western United States, where the Sierra Nevada and Rockies hold snow like nature's great refrigerators, meltwater in late spring and early summer creates the highest size of the year. The Colorado River, though now bound by dams, still reveals the memory of snow and ice in its swell around May and June. In the east and south, spring rains and late summer storms trace different accents. The vast Mississippi, fed by countless tributaries, bears a slower, delayed symphony, like an old song that blends rain with the rustle of corn. This is the seasonal calendar the river writes into its muscles. Year after year, Without a wall calendar, water still remembers when to rise and build the bars and banks, when to fall and return warm sandbars to people's bare feet. If we imagine each drop of water as a traveler, then seasonal memory is the flexible map in its hand. In winter, the drop lies still in ice, a guest sheltering at a mountain inn. In spring, the map unfolds along a long slope. Water leaves, whispering pine forests, slips through rocky channels, runs into tributaries, then joins the main stem like a traveler stepping from a trail onto a wide boulevard. Along the way, the drop notes its markers, cold in the headwaters, warmer in the lowlands, moving slowly in the dawn mist, faster under noon sun, a little restless. But the loveliest part is this: whether hurried or slow, the drop keeps its promise to the sea, like an old friend never forgetting the afternoon tea they vowed to share. When geologists cut into a riverbank, they see alternating layers of fine and coarse sediments like wood grain. Each layer is a season, a storm, a flood. Where water overtopped the bank, heavy sand fell first, then fine silt settled. The next year, the same courtship repeats. Over time, the bank becomes a notebook written in grains. Sometimes a leaf, a grain of pollen, a tiny shell is wedged within a quiet clue telling us, this is what bloomed that season. This is how high the water rose that year. In Oxbow lakes, those former bends cut off from the main flow annual layers stand out as clearly as tree rings. The river outside is busy reshaping itself, but in the isolated lake, the dust of time falls evenly. Memory, there is calm, legible, like a diary page written in neat lines. Not only soil, but water itself remembers through the secret signatures of its atoms. Don't worry, we won't go too deep. Just a whisper about water's fingerprints. In scientific terms, winter water holds more light isotopes, variants of oxygen and hydrogen. When snow and ice melt, that fingerprint marks the tiny travelers streaming down the slopes. So a researcher can look at a vial of river water from May and quietly say, "Ah, I can smell the snow of the plateau." Just as you hear a melody and know who is singing, water lifts its voice to tell, "Here is where I came from. Here are the seasons I passed." Those fingerprints, combined with the rise and fall of water levels, form a memoir of years and decades. Tonight, let us place our imagined hand on the water's skin. You will feel uneven ripples stirred by wind, pulled by the moon. But beneath them is a slower, warmer current, base flow, fed from the ground. Rock and sand layers beneath us are like soaked cushions, holding old storms. When skies have been clear for a long time, the river does not empty at once, because it is nourished by that hidden memory. Scientists call it base flow. We might imagine it as a thermal bottle, heated by the sun in the day, still warm at night. Thanks to that bottle, drought is less harsh, fish are less suffocated, and roots are less dry. Invisible memory is the soil's fidelity to water. If you notice, in many river towns in America, people of the past built homes on natural high steps, called terraces, because they knew when the river was gentle and when it was temperamental. That knowledge needed no heavy books. It hung in flood marks on bridge piers, in stories elders told on porches. Those dry numbers, in 1937, the water came up to here. In 1973, up to there, are red threads binding human memory to river memory. When you walk an evening in Memphis or Natchez and see high water marks on brick walls, You are reading the unrhymed poetry of the Mississippi. Slow, heavy, patient. To keep the rhythm from becoming overcrowded with words, let's listen to an anecdote. On the Hudson, boatmen call the first rush of spring water the freshet, the surface water of the river, carrying the scent of thawing ice and newly opened maple buds. The timber piers, the ropes, the bows of boats are all familiar with that rhythm without needing a calendar, from the old lighthouse keeper to the church bell. Each year they wait for the water to rise one notch, for the tidal flats to change color. When night falls, the small waves tap evenly against the hulls, like someone gently keeping time for a lullaby, repeating an ancient refrain. Each season, its river. Science, when it softens, is like a kind grandmother. She does not forget to remind us. A river's seasonal rhythm can change when we turn forests into highways, fields into rooftops. When a dam holds back water, the memory of seasons is blurred like a photograph passed through too many filters. Floods are less fierce, but spring's gentle rise is also chopped into fragments. Fish that spawn by the old rhythm suddenly grow confused. Tonight we won't argue. We will simply note that the river's memory, its long-standing rise and fall, can be as fragile as an old person's recollection. It needs tenderness, not a heavy hand. Even so, nature keeps patiently practicing its handwriting. On great plains like the Mississippi's, each high water season adds a thin chalk line. Tiny channels and side sloughs like pencil footnotes pour in then retreat, leaving shimmering patches of mineral salt. Greener grass after the flood. Migratory birds memorize that calendar like a mailman learns his route. Which month the geese glide past. Which month the ducks return to old marshes. The river's seasonal memory, it turns out, does not belong to water alone, but is a shared script for the whole region. Trees, birds, insects, and all of us people living on porches that face the river. When you close your eyes, imagine a smooth curve running across all 12 months. At the start of the year, the curve lies low, then rises like an April smile, highest in late spring, early summer, then quiets as the fields turn gold. The hydrograph, let me mention it once in English, to feel familiar to American listeners, looks like a heartbeat on a monitor. Each year, that heart beats in its own way, but overall, it is recognizable, like a jazz tune repeating a theme and then improvising. Those variations tell stories of snowy years, stormy years, long drought years. And scientists use mathematics to separate the theme from the improvisation, to reveal the underlying seasonal motif. But to sleep well, you don't need the equations. You only need to know that this heart rhythm still beats, quietly, on time. And that is why so many riverfronts in America feel like home. Sometimes a river remembers the seasons by scent. Along the Columbia, in early summer, the water smells of sap and sun-warmed stones. On the Gulf Coast, in late summer, the water carries the smell of sea rain, salt mingling with wind. In someone's kitchen, a window is cracked open. Pepper is sprinkled into soup, and the pepper's aroma drifts out to mingle with river mist that is the condensed memory of a small town. This season, people eat like this, talk like this. No statistical yearbook can measure smell, yet smell is the most enduring sense in human memory. Through scent, the river's seasonal memory stitches itself to ours, so that when we hear water, we suddenly crave a dish, remember a person, or feel a corner of the heart grow warm. On satellite maps, muddy and clear bands lie like a patchwork quilt. Each patch is a different high water season, a different year, Farmers read soil color to guess their crops. Hydrologists read structures to infer flows. Sleepers like us look and feel reassured. Water is still doing its work, year after year, diligent and gentle. That regularity is a natural sleeping aid. You close your eyes, murmur each season, its river, and your body clock, like the river's clock, slows down, dropping into a deeper rhythm. We can also notice the quiet intervals in this seasonal music. After flood season, the river grows a little older. Here the channel is wider, they're narrower, the pilings stand barer. The trees along the bars pause and listen, but stillness is not stoppage. Stillness is storage. Water gathers silt, fine grains, nutrients. Soil gathers cool moisture. Roots gather strength to sprout next season. Seasonal memory, then, is not a tape looping identically, but a circular composition with variations each year, adding a touch of color, taking away a touch of bass. In your warm house in Ohio or Texas, perhaps far from any river, that seasonal rhythm still seeps into your sleep, the hum of your air conditioner shifting with the four seasons, the April rain drumming heavier on the roof than September's. You don't have to stand by a river to feel seasonal memory. You only have to admit that your own body is a small current. Heart beating, lungs rising and falling, warm, cool, light, dark. To live in moderation is to harmonize with the river's grand score. At that scale, everything softens. Daytime anxieties rise from the chair by your bed and leave. Tomorrow's plans wait calmly for dawn, and then, on some winter's day, if you happen to stand by a frozen river, lean in and listen. Beneath the clear ice is water still moving slower, deeper, like an elderly storyteller shifting tone. That is the clearest proof that a river's seasonal memory is not a simple on-off switch, but a persistent nod. I remember, I am still going, and I will rise again when the season comes. Ice is only a thin blanket pulled over the shoulders, not a full stop. We can end this part with a simple image. In the evening, an old man in Iowa opens his notebook and draws a blue line on the May page. Today, the river rose. That note, next to watered the garden or called the grandkids, seems private, yet resonates with millions of invisible notes in nature. Every person and every drop of water has their own natural calendar. Thanks to that, tomorrow when the sun appears, the water remembers the path to the sea, and you remember the path to sleep. And if tonight you struggle to fall asleep, softly repeat, each season, it's river. Each season, it's a river. Picture the river you love, the Mississippi, Hudson, Columbia, or some nameless small stream breathing steadily beneath your imagined window. It carries the memory of seasons past, as gentle as a sun-dried cotton quilt laid over you. Every tension slips from your shoulders. Like silt settling out of water, you drift lightly, unhurried, and somewhere where the sea still waits patiently, water's memory hums on, guiding all the land and sky into a tender lullaby. My dear friend, tonight will follow a very slow, very soft curve, passing through water's intention and the earth's endurance. In the quiet gold of your bedside lamp, try picturing a stretch of river before you. By day it seems mild, only a few ripples, but through the lens of many years, it looks like a silk ribbon gently twisting, shifting bit by bit. A river bend is not an impulse. It is the result of physics, of time, of energy flowing through every grain of silt. We begin with a simple image. Imagine you're driving a long, straight highway across the Kansas plains. Everything ahead is linear, until your eyes grow heavy from the monotony. But a river is different. Water dislikes rigid straightness. As it flows, it always searches for the path of least resistance. Just a slight nudge, a small rock, a crooked route, or a streak where the current runs a little faster on the right. And the water falls off balance for a moment. From that tiny imbalance, a curve begins. Scientists call these curves meanders, a word that sounds like a melody, soft yet rhythmic. A meander starts from a very small tilt in velocity. On the outer bank of the curve, the eroding bank, water flows faster, hits harder, and cuts into the soil. On the inner bank, the point bar, water slows down and lays sediment down. One side becomes like a thinning hand, the other like a hand growing fuller. Year after year, this erosion and deposition continue, making the curve larger, widening it like an arm stretching out. You don't need satellite images to see this. If you've ever walked along the Wisconsin River or the looping branches of the Missouri, you'll see crescent-shaped sandbars hugging the inner bends, and taller, retreating banks on the outer side, sometimes collapsing piece by piece. This scene is neither loud nor violent. It is like a task repeated so often it becomes a habit. Sweeping the yard, folding a blanket, brewing a pot of tea. Grain by grain, sediment is set down, clod by clod. The opposite bank is nibbled away. All of it is the discrete daily life of the current. If you'd like an easy metaphor, watch how a strip of silk, nudged by a light breeze, drifts to one side, and when you turn your wrist, the silk follows, drawing a graceful curve. A river does the same. It does not draw bends with conscious intent. It simply responds to three factors: velocity, depth, and bank shape. From that, meanders are born, grow, and sometimes grow old enough to be cut off, becoming oxbow lakes. If we zoom out in time as if fast-forwarding a film, you'll see the river moving sideways more than downward. It swings the bend left, then right, so that in the end it travels in a zigzag. In truth, a meandering river can shift sideways many times its own width over a few centuries. This turns the floodplain into a moving picture. No point fixed forever. Science explains this with helical flow, the spiral motion that makes water twist from the outer bank to the inner bank through a bend. As this spiral lifts sediment from the outer bank and carries it inward to settle on the inner bar, it creates a continuous dance. Emotionally, you might picture water as someone wrapping a silk scarf around their neck, each loop reshaping the curve. Every bend is carved by that motion. Now let's sit on a grassy bank near our imagined river. Night, light breeze, and you hear a tiny sound, a soft crack of collapsing soil. That is when a small clump drops from the outer bank into the flow. It tumbles away, while you might think of it as trivial. For the river, it is a new line written in its diary. One fallen clod is a decision about its future shape. Longtime residents along rivers like the Ohio or Arkansas know this well. They say the lawn behind their house can walk backward a few inches each year. First, roots appear exposed. Next rainy season, the cut bites deeper. A few years more, the fence leans toward the water. The more such stories you hear, the clearer it becomes that time not only ages people, it also gives the river a new face. In science, a river bend is more than a pretty shape. It is a climate journal. When climate shifts, water volume changes, flood behavior changes, and meander geometry changes with them. Just as a person's voice shifts with their moods, the river's form shifts with larger cycles of nature. Rivers in glacial periods are straighter, stronger. In warm periods, they curve softly and spread wider. That is why, when researchers measure meander patterns in images spanning centuries, they can infer whether rainfall was abundant or scarce, soils were wet or dry, riparian ecosystems were thriving or retreating. We might say, the river does not just react to time, it records time in curves. To bring this closer to you, a grown person who has witnessed many life cycles, think of the phases when your life ran straight, like a highway, clear, decisive. Then think of the phases when you slowed, turned gently, bent in response to conditions you could not ignore. Looking back, those curves are where your deepest experiences took root. So it is with the river. In the long view, its bends are where fertility gathers, where life thrives most. Small fish shelter in slow water, roots stretch into fresh bars. Flocks of waterbirds rest on crescent shoals. Meanders are not the river's hesitations, they are its expressions of abundance. Within the channel, swirling currents create a steady sound, almost like a lullaby. If you've ever stood on a low bridge in northern Minnesota or above a small Missouri branch, you may have heard that gentle rotary murmur as water hugs a bend. Those sounds are low, warm, stable, very much like a slow heartbeat before sleep. If we stand longer, we'll see that each curve is a dialogue between water and earth. The land asks, "Where do you want to go?" And water answers with patience. The land says, "I will fall here." And water replies, "I will carry you away, set you down where it is softer." This conversation never ends. Sometimes, on a long night when no one is on the bank, the river bends just a little more. No one hears the quiet erosion, but the next morning its trace is clear. A wider sandbar, a torn-out route, the main flow shifted a few feet. All the result of a night's diligent work by nature. There are times, inside an old meander, when the curve grows so extreme that the neck becomes just a narrow strip of land. Flood season arrives, and water breaks through that neck. In a few days, a shortcut opens. The river abandons the long loop, chooses the straight path, and the old meander becomes an oxbow lake. We can see it as water's response when long-built tension finally releases, like a strong breath cutting across an otherwise even lullaby. Even when a river leaves its old bend, it still imprints a soft curve on the plain. Seen from above, that mark looks like a faded smile, but its shape remains. Those who have lived long by the river say, the river moves with its belly, meaning it shifts sideways because its own weight pushes it over. But scientists say the river moves with its memory, because each curve continues the long history of erosion and deposition, and the truth lies in between. It is that very memory that creates the belly. Imagine this story as a lullaby. A meander is like a lullaby sung many times, slow, steady, repetitive, yet each time just a little different. Sometimes the voice quivers lightly, drops down, or rises by a note. Those small variations complete the river's lullaby. You lie down, feel the coolness of your pillow, the ceiling fan's steady breath, and now, in your mind, the river is bending, unhurried, not trying to prove anything, just curving a little, then a little more, to become more truly itself. Each bend in the river is a classical movement of the earth, and as you listen to that story, you are also listening to yourself. because your life, like the river, is not a straight line. It is a sequence of beautiful curves whose beauty you sometimes only recognize after you have traveled a very long way. From the bends and the whispers of silt we have just passed through, we now step softly deeper beneath the surface, where the cool darkness holds the last sound of the rain. There, the river's memory is no longer the arcs on a map, but a gentle, enduring groundwater pulse, breathing steadily, holding tight, then releasing softly. My dear friend, when you close your eyes at the end of a long day, imagine that beneath the silent grass along the Mississippi or the Hudson, there is an entire city of water slowly shifting, tiny veins like narrow alleys, rock cavities like quiet squares, and countless junctions where droplets meet, exchange a greeting, then part, so that they surface in the river today in calm and tomorrow somewhere else. That is groundwater, the silent memory of the flow. On the surface, the river can be impulsive in flood, sparse in drought. But below, groundwater is patient, like a keeper of stores for hard seasons, opening its doors at the right moment when the surface runs dry. That's why, in the hot August of the Midwest, when rain has not yet returned, you can still hear water whispering beneath the little town bridge that is memory speaking, pushing base flow into the river, weaving the sustaining current. Hydrologists call the interaction between river and soil the hyporheic zone, a transition layer where surface water threads into sand and gravel, exchanging gases, temperature, minerals, and microbes. There, the river seems to lay its ear against the earth to hear deeper stories. A droplet that has just passed through cottonwood roots or brushed a rounded cobble from some long ago melt season. The hyporheic zone is the porch between two houses, neither fully outside nor inside, helping the river breathe, easing its temperature on hot days and preserving the full flavor of calcium, magnesium, iron, the mineral seasonings that make one river's water different from another's. For scientists, that zone is a notebook dense with handwriting. By measuring temperature, flow, or stable isotopes of oxygen and hydrogen, they can tell how long a droplet has been underground, whether it has just arrived or has lain quietly through many seasons. The memory of groundwater is not a memory that can be retold in words, but a memory of delay. Rain falls today, yet the river may not change much. Weeks or months later, when everything on the surface has forgotten, the aquifer begins to answer. The curves on a discharge graph, the falling tail after the flood peak, are memory's handwriting. They reflect the rate at which water slowly returns from storage to the river. The more open sand and gravel, the more rock fractures, the longer the memory. The more clay, the shorter and sharper the memory. Thus, a stream in the Appalachians can react fast like a gust of wind. Rain comes, water rises, then quiets quickly, while a branch of the Colorado flowing through sedimentary rock swells slowly, drawing out the feeling that the rain is still here somewhere, even when the sky has long cleared. There is a lovely moment when a flood has passed. River water pushes into the banks, seeping into pores like a traveler, leaving a warm coat at a pawn shop before crossing the pass. Hydrologists call this bank storage, the reserve in the banks. Days or weeks later, as the river level drops, that reserve opens and lets water return, like handing back the pledged coat to its tired owner. So if you have ever seen a river not dropping as sharply as expected when no new rain has fallen, it is the bank's memory store gently dripping back what it kept. That tender delay is a form of kindness. It softens extremes, spares fish and insects from shock, and lets floodplain forests keep drinking the last sips after the uproar. When we talk about the age of water, listeners often feel surprised. Does water have an age? Scientists don't ask which year a droplet was born, but they trace time's marks. Stable isotopes like oxygen, 1,8 or deuterium tell origin. Winter rain differs from summer rain. Rarer signatures from the atmosphere of past decades can stamp an era like dust from the 1,950 seconds that settled into an aquifer and is only now seeping into springs. Through this, we learn that many temperate rivers are fed by old water during drought. Water that wandered past last year's roots lay its cheek against cool rock for many years, while during big storms, a paradox appears. The torrent may be composed largely of very young water, only weeks old. This layering of young and old creates the tone of the flow, deep and steady at the base, fresh at the surface, like a choir with a bass line holding rhythm so the sopranos can soar. For those who have lived beside a river all their lives, groundwater memory is visible to the patient eye. In Florida, where freshwater springs as blue as ocean eyes gush from limestone caves, the dry season is story time. Streams keep flowing from cavern mouths, the water so cool and constant that your hand feels time itself slow by half a beat. In the Yakima Valley or the folded rocks of Nevada, old wells that run steady at noon in summer are the heartbeat of underground flow feeding a river miles away. And in the corn and wheat country of the Midwest, irrigation ditches lace the land like nerves. When rain is scarce, you can sense a band of quiet sound, like insects sleeping in wood that is the shallow aquifers answering. Subsurface memory does more than hold flow. It shapes taste and color. Water that lingers long in limestone picks up gentle hardness and a milky jade hue. Water passing through soft peat darkens like tea, with the smell of damp leaves, turning the river's surface into a brown silk. Those tiny minerals decide the feast for algae, the tempo of tadpole lives, and even the thickness of mussel shells resting under the sand. Subterranean memory is the river's recipe archive. Each basin is a dish seasoned by contact time, rock type, and the depth of roots. Of course, any memory can be disturbed. When we overpump groundwater for dry seasons, we thin the base that feeds the river. When we straighten banks, pave over sand and gravel, the hyporheic zone, that delicate porch, loses its breathing space. When dams clamp down on flow timing, bank storage can be locked into artificial schedules, like an alarm clock set to the wrong hour. Yet, science also offers gentle remedies, giving floodplains back some curves so water can slow, replacing hard walls with big stone and woody debris so the hyporheic zone can grow like moss, allowing spring floods a bit of room to deposit their coats in bank storage, giving rivers something to pour back slowly in summer. Tonight, picture a cool glass of water on your kitchen table. The path that brought that droplet to your lips may have begun like an old story. A snowflake melting on a distant mountain, slipping into a thread-like rivulet, gliding past stones, then vanishing suddenly into gravel underfoot. Not gone, only entering memory. A month later, under harsher sun, that droplet meets you again in your glass, meets the river again as base flow. 1,000 unexpected paths converging. Set the glass by an open window at night, and you will see its surface so still you can hear your own heartbeat, which is also the quiet rhythm of the aquifer beneath your house, moving slowly, indifferent to calendars on the wall, guided only by an ancient instinct to return to the sea, unhurried. In terms of measurement, hydrologists have numbers as gentle as breaths, the transmissivity of sandy layers telling how fast water moves, recession curves drawing the length of memory, and age maps of water showing which depth slices feed the river in which season. But in the realm of sleep, Perhaps you only need this image. Beneath every stand of reeds is a horde of droplets lying together, waiting for the right moment to step out into moonlight. They whisper to each other about the first rain, the brushing of roots, a bit of gossip from rolling pebbles. When cricket song evens out, they know it is time. Memory should open its door so that the surface flow is not alone. In the arid West, many rivers are like instruments, missing strings. Some reach dry on the surface, yet below, the strings remain unbroken. These lost rivers need only a sustained rainstorm to reappear. Not by miracle, but because groundwater has been keeping their lines ready beneath the sand. Like a faithful friend, groundwater does not boast. It marks time quietly in the background, strikes its notes when needed, then retreats so the surface can glitter. In the ecosystem's music, it is the hard-working bass line without which the song would sound thin. And there is another marvel. Subsurface memory helps rivers keep their seasons. In many temperate places, late melting snow, chilly autumn rains, these signals seep into the aquifer as notes in the four-season score. Come summer, when the valley pants with heat, the aquifer opens its music box, releasing a phrase from winter cool, oxygen-rich water that soothes hot days for salmon and bass, resting in the shade of fallen trees. That off-season reply is memory itself. Water not only passes through, it records time to replay a cooling motif when most needed. If you are listening at 60 or 70, I hope this image feels familiar. An old drawer where you keep letters, family photos, and a seashell from your youth. You don't open it every day, but the moment your hand touches the wooden handle, your chest softens memory waiting there. Intact, courteous. Groundwater is like that. Not always on display, but always ready. And when released, what flows out is not just water, but the accumulation of years. A hint of lime, the taste of stone, a faint natural saltiness, a chill that makes your hand think of snow from many winters past. Before you sink deeper into sleep, drop with me a small question into the dark. Is it perhaps memory itself that helps the river find its way to the sea? When the surface seems lost among leveled fields, when concrete roads slice through ancient bends, water still finds a route partly by gravity, partly by open, low paths, but also quietly through an underground network that has memorized the terrain. Like an old ferryman who can navigate with eyes closed, knowing where currents twist and rocks lie hidden, the subsurface has learned the least resistant paths, encoded in porous soils and fractured rock. So when we say, the river and time, when water remembers the way home to the sea, please don't think only of a distant metaphor. That memory is real, made of physical and chemical mechanisms, of phase lags and storage release pathways. But it is also tender and human, like a bedtime story, someone cherishing small details, tucking them into a drawer, waiting for the stillness of night to open it quietly. Tonight, if your eyelids close, let the memory of groundwater do its work, keeping the flow alive in your dreams, passing it slowly back to the river, and without haste, carrying everything toward the sea. From the slow breath of the previous tale, we gently move to another layer of memory. Memory not in banks or silt, but living inside bodies that know how to listen to water. There, each molecule of river scent, each quiet magnetic ripple, becomes a soft map guiding the way home. There is something wondrous about rivers that the softer we speak of it, the clearer we hear it. A river does not only remember through banks and bends, but entrusts its memory to the creatures that travel between fresh and salt. On the American West Coast, where the Columbia runs strong through gorges and towns, Pacific salmon still enact an ancient rite. Born in cold headwaters, growing up in the ocean, then returning to the very stream where they first touched water. In New England, along the misty rivers of Maine, slender American eels leave the Sargasso Sea calm waters, cloaked in sargassum to slip into fresh waters, live for years, then return to the sea to spawn and close a mysterious circle. These returns look like miracles, yet each step is bound to subtle science. Imprinted smells, magnetic maps, tidal rhythms, and even the odor of bedrock, forest leaves, and mud. Imagine a young salmon about to come of age, shifting from a small river fish into an ocean traveler. That moment, the smolt stage, as biologists call it, is like the night before we leave home for the first time. Every sense sharpens, every detail becomes a keepsake. Dissolved organics from pine forests, a hint of resin, trace minerals from granite or basalt upstream, all blend into the river's unique formula. The fish stores that formula, not in words, but in the fine wiring of its olfactory system. Years later, tail beating in the vast ocean, it replays that formula like a recorded tape, follows the remembered scent, enters the estuary, avoids the wrong branches, and reaches the very stream reach where it first shivered in early light. Science has repeatedly tested this poetic idea and found its hard core of truth. Experiments that alter a river's smell climate, adding or removing compounds, show that salmon can lose their way if the formula is distorted too deeply. Conversely, when old side channels are restored, so forest water and soil can return the original scent. Salmon runs begin to split and sort correctly. The river, through the salmon's nose, turns out to be a fragrance archive that cannot be confused. For older American listeners, this may evoke a mother's kitchen, where the smell of pumpkin pie or nutmeg pulls you uphill through time. For salmon, a trace of forest-scented water is the invitation home. But smell is not all. Far offshore, salmon need a course map to locate themselves relative to the continent. Many studies show they sense the Earth's magnetic field, its intensity and inclination, like carrying a silent compass. That magnetic map does not say, "Here is your natal creek," but whispers, "Swim this way toward the northwest coast, where your familiar smells will greet you." When the magnetic chart overlays the scent score, the homeward journey refines itself, from the open ocean narrowing to a river mouth, from the river mouth narrowing to channels, then to a single stream, like a needle driven to the center of a circle. Meanwhile, tides lay a hand on the fish's shoulder, setting the tempo. Tidal flows push in, pull out, and the salinity gradient marks a sharp sensory boundary, like a thread in a weaver's fingers. On the salty side, the air carries dry salt. On the fresh side, the damp smell of leaves and mud. At the mixing zone, salmon read the doorway open at just the right moment. Some scientists call it a salinity funnel effect, where the gradient is not only a physiological challenge but a signpost. The American eel tells a different tune, more enigmatic, slower, like a drawn-out brass note in a night orchestra. Eels do not home to one exact natal stream like salmon. They are more flexible with their freshwater destinations, but they are masters of reading flow. Born in the Sargasso, their leaf-like larvae drift with the vast North Atlantic gyre along the Gulf Stream's edge, then transform into glass eels and slip into estuaries under the evening cloak of tides. They seem to feel both the scent of continents and subtle magnetic shifts. A compass as soft as a strand of hair, and align their movement with the moon's cycles. Their precision lies not in this creek, but in this kind of place, this season, where life suits their needs. When it is time, they sink back into salt water, dive under the magnetic song of the ocean, return to spawn, and vanish like a quiet farewell. In this larger picture, memory is not stored in the head the way we imagine, but scattered everywhere, in olfactory genes, in ion channels that sense magnetism, in odor-binding proteins, in biological clocks tied to lunar cycles. River and creatures share one another's memory. Water offers forest scent to fish. Fish bring the story of return back to the river. When we hear water, we hear two woven recollections. To speak of America is to speak of migration routes that have long braided with human history. Indigenous peoples once greeted salmon runs as seasonal gifts. Many communities along rivers in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho still hold first salmon ceremonies. Now, each time a dam is removed, as on the Elwha, a quiet marvel unfolds. River scents once broken by reservoirs reconnect. Salmon, thought to have forgotten, begin to remember. They follow the restored fragrance, like elders finding the old laundry scent in a towel, and ancient spawning grounds slowly reopen after decades. This is more than ecology. It is the restoration of shared memory between river and fish, people and home. Yet memory can be thrown off beat. When river water's smell changes too quickly, forests replaced by concrete, runoff carrying fertilizers that trigger algal blooms, channels straightened, the olfactory score, salmon, once imprinted, becomes warped. On the Columbia, barging young salmon around dams helps them survive to the ocean, but can disrupt their smolt imprinting. The fish live, but their internal scent compass is blurred. Conservation science has had to learn to act like a careful perfumer, letting juveniles taste enough of the reach they must someday return to. Timing spillway releases to match natural seasons, drawing cold water from reservoir depths to mix the right scent, a quiet but demanding art. As for smell, let us listen more closely. River scent is not just salt or mud. It is a blend of countless dissolved organics, humic acids from forests, faint phenols from decaying leaves, minerals from bedrock, and microbial signatures transforming small molecules into messages. Each basin, with its geology and vegetation, writes a unique aroma script. When salmon pass an unfamiliar estuary, the script does not match, and they go on. When a hint of their natal aroma appears, they turn, their speed shifts, tail beats change. Biologists can measure that change, like measuring a heartbeat, quickening at an old song. Someone may ask, if climate warms, flows shift, will memory break? A light question in tone, heavy at heart. Warmer water shifts the timing of smoltification, pushes salt wedges farther inland in dry years, making the scent doorway open at odd hours. Some runs adapt, choosing new tributaries. Others wait another season. Here, the river's own memory kept in bars, dunes. Old channels can help us rearrange pathways so the scent music fits new rhythms. Reopening an old channel is not merely digging, it is completing a half-finished poetic line in the odor script, so creatures can read on. Beyond scent and magnetism are subtler cues. The turbidity after storms, the color of light inside deep gorges, the slowing of current as rivers spread into plains. Many species read them as trackers read footprints. Sturgeon ancient as Earth's memory move with cold water pulses. Carp follow warmth. Each carries a dictionary of signs, and together they compose the river's seasonal calendar. For listeners aged 45 to 90, this may be a gentle reminder. Our bodies, too, have a dictionary of signs that once told us when rain was coming, bread was done, or the village road was near. Memory is not only in the mind, it lives in skin, nose, heartbeat, and rivers. Through their migrant life, are telling us the same. Let us return to a late autumn moonlit night by the Penobscot. Water is ebbing slowly. The air smells of yellowing maple leaves. Tiny glass eels, bright as strands of rain, drift at the edge of salt and fresh, waiting for the right instant, then suddenly rise like a fine smoke into brackish water. No one commands them, no loud signal, only the precise convergence of many small cues, a touch of shore scent, a tilt in the tide, a sigh of wind merging into a nod. That is the music of return, played with water as the instrument, told softly. This story opens a kinder view of conservation. Don't think only of building more. At times, we must do less. Less straightening, less squeezing, less bleaching of smells. Give the river back its breathing tempo. So scent memory has places to overwinter and summer. Reopen old water paths to invite new returns. In many American rivers, volunteers stand on bridges each salmon season, counting fish and trading stories of past runs. Now they have added a quiet habit, stepping down to the bank, opening their hands, inhaling. If the smell of damp leaves and cold stone rushes up clearly, they smile, because that smell, for salmon, is a postcard reading. Home is still here. For the listener drifting towards sleep, keep this last image as a soft quilt. A small fish that once sipped a mouthful of cold stream water, storing within itself a simple, perfect scent formula, then swam into the great ocean. Years later, in the roar of waves, it suddenly stops, as if remembering a friend's name, turns, and begins its upstream journey. Each bend, each sandbar, each leaf that brushes its snout is like another old photograph in a worn leather album. It swims through the night, following a milky way of scents, through the salty fresh gate, over falls and rapids, to where the water is as gentle as a lullaby. There, beneath the forest shade, it closes one life and opens another. In that moment, we see clearly what this video wants to offer. Enough understanding to grant respect, and enough respect to let understanding become soothing. The river has memory. Creatures are swimming pages, and we, simply by listening, can read a whole library about the way home. We have just passed through the gentle retreat of flood season, with warm silt streaks on the banks like diary pages not yet closed. From that memory, let me invite you to lean in and hear the river's breathing. No clamor, only steady, near, enduring vibrations. If you close your eyes now, imagine a river breathing in the night house of memory. One expansion, one contraction, then again. Everything seems random, and yet strangely has order. Hydrologists were once astonished to find that rivers do not roar with the flat, white noise of an old TV screen. The color of river sound leans pink. Energy is richer in slower variations, poorer in very fast ones. They call it pink noise 1F. As frequency rises, the strength of fluctuations falls. Thus, the long, deep, persistent rhythms of the river are always present as background music, and it is precisely that background that often soothes our brains. Like rain on the eaves, distant surf, or the slow breath of a loved one sleeping in the next room. In fact, the story began decades ago along the long, dry reaches of the Nile. An engineer named Hearst patiently read centuries of water level records. He wanted to know, how big must a dam be? How to anticipate flood years and drought years. He discovered something that defied simple intuition. River level fluctuations are not independent, not a matter of today is like this and tomorrow, who knows. Rivers have persistence, a kind of statistical stubbornness. If several years run wet, the following years are more likely to be wet. If drought lingers, it tends to echo. Mathematicians call this long-term memory. Storytellers say, the river remembers, to keep things from feeling dry. Let's think of it this way. In nature's great house, every room holds a tone of its own. Monsoon rain, high mountain snow, underground lakes, tree roots, wide floodplains. The river is the hallway connecting all those rooms. When a rainstorm ends, the water doesn't vanish at once. It leaves envelopes in the mailboxes of soil, sand, and hidden fractures. A week later, a month later, even years later, those envelopes are opened and their contents flow out softly. That is why today's river is still answering letters from clouds that passed in previous seasons. That answer stretches time, and that is memory. Science expresses this with a number, the Hearst coefficient. If the number leans toward 1/2, the system resembles white noise, hardly any memory. But most rivers show values greater than 1/2, meaning persistence, the patience of water, the habit of attachment. This is not magic. It is the sum of storage in soil moisture memory, of base flow from aquifers, of late spring snowmelt, of trees opening and closing tiny valves on their leaves with the seasons. All of it is the long, slow breathing of a large body called a watershed. You might ask, so what is pink noise in my everyday life? Remember the bedside radio from childhood, when you turned the volume low enough to hear only a soft hum in the background, not as flat as white noise, not as monotone as a single low drone, but like a blanket woven from countless threads, each thread a vibration of different length, interlaced. In nature, persistent rain at night is often 1F, the hush of forest leaves, waves gently licking a sandy shore 2. Many sleep devices in the U.S. now default to pink noise, because both older and younger brains tend to synchronize with energy, spread out over octaves of frequency, each band with its own share, none overpowering the rest. Rivers have been playing that score long before sound machines were invented. From a hydrologic view, this music is the expression of a multi-scale time structure. At the daily scale, flows wiggle with afternoon showers. At the monthly scale, with the seasons. At interannual scales, with El Niño and La Niña. At decadal scales, with broader climate oscillations. The river system gathers all those timescales like flutes of different lengths playing together. The result is a sloping spectrum 1F. If you replay long-term stage records from the Mississippi, Columbia, or Colorado, you'll see long and short phrases linking together. Not isolated notes, they tell of late snowmelt in the Rockies, of Atlantic storm seasons, of sedges on the plains, sipping moisture like sponges. This is how water remembers, not by writing words, but by changing rhythm. And there is more. Within each filament of water, there is memory. Turbulence seems disordered, yet it obeys a ritual of whirling eddies. Large eddies birth smaller ones. Smaller ones pass energy to even smaller ones, like breaking bread from a big loaf down to crumbs. Along the way, a dry leaf falling in will not drift purely at random. It pauses in favored swirls, slides along thin sheer layers, invisible, coherent structures. In the flow Lagrangian corridors, preserve information about pathways for a while, then release it in bursts. To the human ear, this becomes ripples that are more even than the chaos suggested by the eye. To the human heart, it becomes a familiar feeling, as if an unseen hand were smoothing the surface instead of chopping it to pieces. As we grow older, the brain becomes more sensitive to steady backgrounds, the soft rhythm of a ceiling fan, a grandfather clock ticking, a river murmuring under a bridge. Such backdrops do not excite us into alertness, they cultivate drowsiness. Sleep science describes how the brain's slow waves synchronize when it feels safe, surrounded by stable, predictable signals. Pink noise, including the sound of a river, whispers that message. No danger, no shock, only long waves. That's why, when we tell river stories, we unconsciously slow our voice, stretch our vowels, and leave a pause before the next thought. We're imitating the river without realizing it. Within the water, memory has shapes as well. Old bends cut off by oxbow formation still murmur with the main channel through groundwater. Fish that live by tide schedules swim into mangrove forests at high water, back out at low, their clocks tied to the moon. Each day, tides send a different pulse up estuarine rivers. Every 2 weeks, a stronger beat, new moon, full moon, then weaker first quarter, last quarter. Those fortnightly rhythms are yet another layer in the river's 1F music. Very slow, very deep, yet always returning. You can picture the river's house like a classic American wooden home. The foundation is the decadal rhythm. Walls are the annual cycle, windows are the seasons, curtains are the daily swings. The sunlit stripe on the floor is the hourly shift. Everything moves in harmony, nothing shouts over the rest. When you step inside, you feel at peace, because the energy has been divided cleanly among its rooms. That is the character of Pink Noise. And when you sit in the rocking chair, hearing the river through the open window, your brain knows exactly where you are on the map of the day. In the landing zone, a small life story to link with the science. In Midwestern towns, elders recall. That year the water rose and the sandpipers came early. That year snow lay deep and spring arrived late. Then 2 years in a row, the corn was plentiful. Community memory unknowingly repeats what Hearst wrote in Equations. The river passing through the village is like an old neighbor. He talks about today, but also about 3-5 years ago, so we can guess what tomorrow might bring. Sometimes he speaks too slowly for the young. They don't bother listening. But the old do, and they sleep well. On charts pinned in hydrologists' offices, you see something else. Zoom in on a segment of the hydrograph, and it resembles the entire record. Jagged teeth interspersed with flat stretches. Zoom again, and the pattern remains. That is self-similarity, fractal behavior. When Benoit Mandelbrot examined river data, he noticed Joseph effects runs of good years after good years, bad after bad, like the biblical story of 7 fat years, 7 lean years. In hydrology, this is not a myth, but a consequence of long-term memory. Nature still springs, surprises, rare storms, unusual hurricanes. But against the long backdrop, the river keeps its slow, even repetitive voice. You may be lying in bed in a city far from the sea. That's fine. Imagine the water map just below your feet. Roof gutters, the ditch by the porch, storm drains along the street, a little creek in the park, all connecting to some distant blue line, then to the ocean. At night, when human noise fades, we begin to hear the water, or hear it with imagination flowing. That rhythm doesn't urge you to act, it teaches you to let go, because the essence of water is to move on, and the way it moves is to remember. When water remembers, it rushes less. When we remember, we also fret less. But river memory is not only gentle. Sometimes it holds on to drought too long. Forests lose water and stay thirsty for years. Or it clings to wet spells so that floods come more often. Understanding this, we learn to match its rhythm, restoring wetlands as cushions, protecting headwater forests as lungs. Where dams already stand, people learn to create environmental flows, releases with a rhythm that let fish spawn. Mangroves breathe. We give rivers back their steady breath, and in return, we earn more peaceful sleep in the valleys. If you're restless tonight, try a small exercise. Inhale for 4 counts, exhale for 6. Count softly like counting waves. Imagine each breath as a reach of the river. Longer beats carry more energy. Shorter beats are small ripples. In this way, you're giving your brain a 1F spectrum of breathing. You're doing what rivers have done since the earth was young, distributing energy across timescales, so the whole remains stable, even when the details change. From your breath to the river's breath, everything blends. And if you'd like one more small story before you drift off, someone once placed a recorder by a riverside at midnight in June. When they played it back, they heard insects, water brushing grass, and an occasional stone rolling. No big climax, no dramatic crescendos. Yet replayed over and over, it strangely wore away the restlessness in the chest. Each listen let the ear catch a different slow beat, a distant dam release, a fish splash, a shift of wind. All those beats together became a hammock. You lie down, and it rocks you, from science to sleep, from formulas to breathing. Pink noise and long-term memory are just our ways of naming a deeply human truth. Everything gentle and enduring keeps a calendar. So do rivers. They are polite enough to give notice. They rarely change their plans overnight, unless storms force them. Most of the time, they repeat old lines. This season is still damp. This year is still snowy. Tonight is still full of insects. And so they sing you to sleep. When you hear water, you are not just hearing the present. You're hearing last month, last year, last decade, compressed into a soft vibration. You hear the moon outside your window, tugging twice a day. You hear forests far away, opening and closing their pores. You hear the soil releasing the letters of water it stored. And you hear yourself a heartbeat many years old, carrying its own one. F pattern, steady and mild, slowing a bit in winter, racing a bit when you hurry, but over the long view showing a quiet order. So, after all these winding stories, is there a subtler, almost invisible form of memory a river keeps? Does water only flow, or does it also whisper through tiny salts, elusive scents, ratios as light as breath? Tilt your head gently and let the smell of stone, fresh moss, and distant sea open that door. If we think of the river as a calm storyteller, its voice is not only the murmur of riffles or the silver of moonlit ripples. Its voice also lives in dissolved ingredients the eye can't see. Calcium teased from ancient limestone, sodium from marine salts gathered by past tides, magnesium from metamorphic rock, traces of organics from fallen leaves, and the faintest signatures of oxygen and hydrogen isotopes in each droplet. To scientists, this is a symphony of countless notes, each with its own origin, pitch, and pause. To tonight's listener, it is how the river remembers through its own flavor and substance. Have you ever stepped into an old childhood house and, within seconds, the smell of wood and sunlit dust carried you back to afternoons long gone? Water is like that. On its way to the sea, each reach of the river passes over different bedrock, forests, and towns. Each place seasons the flow. Minerals from stone, organic acids from humus, pollen dust now and then. All blend like a long-simmered broth. When the rains arrive, the broth changes taste. More iron from freshly washed red soils, shifts in conductivity as salts are flushed. A hydrologist reading conductivity over time, the chemical heartbeat, can see a river's habits. That rhythm repeats with the seasons, like a children's rhyme of water. Repetition means memory, and there are memories so delicate our noses can't catch them, though animals can. Think of salmon on the Pacific coast, from Alaska to Oregon and Washington. Hatched in cold streams, they head to sea, then years later return to the very creeks of their birth. Once called a miracle of instinct, this is now gently explained. In their first weeks, salmon imprint the chemical scent of their stream, the blend of minerals, organics, moss, microbial life as we memorize our home address. When it's time to return, they follow that odor map, along with magnetic cues, current patterns, and a bit of luck. Picture a quiet night, a scattering of dark salmon bodies like falling stars in the water, each fish pressing its nose into the flow, checking the scent signatures of banks and bars, choosing the exact turn it needs. In that moment, the river's chemical memory, crafted by valley and flow, becomes a round-trip ticket home. So the river doesn't only remember the way to the sea, it also grants its creatures a way back to their source. How does science hear these scents and signatures? One gentle method is conductivity, like feeling a child's forehead for a fever. More salts, higher conductivity, heavy rain, fresher water, lower values. A finer method is isotope ratios. Oxygen 1:8 versus oxygen 1:6. Deuterium versus normal hydrogen. These ratios, written as delta 180, delta D, encode temperature, elevation, and the history of rain and evaporation. Every droplet is a postcard. I was born on the eastern flank of this mountain, at this height, in that season. Once it joins the river, we can read the postcard, piece together its route. Isotopes let us read the invisible travel diary that water carries like ink you only see under certain light. At this point, you might smile. Isn't this overcomplicating? Water just runs downhill. True, gravity is the quiet conductor of all rivers, but because water goes down, it meets countless things on its way. A red maple leaf in Vermont, pine pollen in Montana, a spoon of road salt washed from a winter highway into a Louisiana bayou. Each contribution dissolves, even in tiny concentrations. It nudges the river's memory a little. Tonight, as you listen, imagine each salt ion as a letter. Letters form words, Words form sentences. Summer is one chapter, winter another. A wet year writes one passage, a dry year another. The whole book flows to the sea, new text layered over old. Thus, scientists don't only measure the present, they compare against long records, decades of chemical memory. When one year's pattern looks utterly strange, they know the river is remembering. A new story, a major storm, a new dam, a forest replaced by farmland. Chemical memory becomes a health journal for the whole basin. Some nights, fishermen in Maine say they can forecast mountain rain from the taste of the river. The water feels young, light, as if missing salt. They don't name calcium or magnesium, but the tongue has its own memory. Like knowing the difference between tea steeped too fast and tea steeped just right. Such folk tales often hold a kernel of truth. Upland rain dilutes ions, changes turbidity, brings humic acids from leaves, making the water softer. It is lovely when human memory and water's memory tell the same story in two languages. Sometimes, the river's chemical memory reflects our interventions, and here the tone must soften, because it touches responsibility. When an upstream factory changes its process, the river's composition shifts. More phosphate, less nitrate, or the reverse. A town spreads road salt in winter. Spring melt bumps salinity for weeks in nearby creeks. A hydrology team can pick that signal from the natural background. If we listen early, these traces allow corrections, so the river's memory doesn't harden into a long ache. Fortunately, like the human body, a river can heal. Its flow, microbes, and riverside vegetation are patient physicians. With time and kindness, sad pages can be overwritten in green. Now, we return to scent, the gentlest memory. Night in Ohio, mist over the water. You stand on a wooden bridge and breathe in wet grass, cold metal, and a very old smell, the smell of mud that has lain there for ages. To ecologists, this is a blend of volatile organics from bacteria, algae, and decaying leaves. Each basin, with its own plants and soils, has a slightly different note. Fish and amphibians live by these notes. To them, it's the evening church bell, the call to supper, when a river's smell shifts through drought, through reservoirs aging the water, through reeds replacing native grasses. They are as disoriented as a person lost in their own old neighborhood. This is a quiet story, showing a thread of empathy, water's memory woven with life's memory. Soon, as you fall asleep, imagine yourself as a raindrop landing on a tin roof in a Midwestern town. You slide into a gutter, pause on a maple leaf, absorb a hint of sugar from its sap. You fall to the ground, slip into a tiny rut, meet sand, pick up a few sodium ions, drop into a ditch, hear frogs, pass through a culvert into a creek, then a large river. Along the way, you change composition bit by bit, like a traveler picking up new turns of phrase crossing state lines. At the estuary, you taste salt. All memories mingle: forest, field, city, the call of the deep sea. You do not think like a human, but you carry a half-written chemical book, and the ocean is an endless library ready to receive another chapter. For scientists, reading this memory answers questions that sound very ordinary. Where does our drinking water mostly come from in drought season? How much of today's flow is last night's rain? Will early snowmelt in the Rockies arrive in time to support the Colorado? Such questions, answered with graphs, isotopes, and simple assays, return to intimate concerns. Which fields can plant a new crop? Which factories must cut back? Which dam should release a little more? So migrating fish don't miss their window. In this way, the river's chemical memory, seemingly academic, becomes the pulse of daily life. But don't forget the gentle magic. The river keeps its memories to tell us stories if we will sit still. Place a glass jar in the Mississippi on a September afternoon and scoop some water. Under the lamp, it looks clear, yet if we could magnify its story, we'd see tiny numbers. Delta 18, a whispering of clouds and distant hills. A conductivity curve recalling a thunderstorm 2 days ago. A few drifting dandelion grains from someone's yard. Harmless bacteria nibbling leaf fragments, creating faint fragrances. Together they form a flavor memory. The river carries seawards. No one steals it. No one can. It simply grows and changes with time. You might ask, if memory keeps changing, can we still call it memory? A fair question. The river's memory is not a frozen photograph. It is like a melody played hundreds of times, each performance slightly different in mood, instrument, and room. What makes it memory is the recurring motif. Estuary, salinity pulsing with the lunar cycle. Stronger calcium notes when snowmelt comes. Richer organics as autumn leaves fall. Those motifs are enough for salmon to find home, for hydrologists to recognize their river's voice. And precisely because it is not fixed, this memory is alive, growing with forests and with people. In the night, the story slows, like water under a thin veil of mist. If you're in Florida, where lazy rivers wind through wet meadows, their chemical memory is steeped in tannins, tea-colored, gentle as sun. If you're in the arid southwest, sparse rivers hold traces of old waters, harder in taste, telling of rock and wind. If you're in New England, winter road salt leaves its mark. Come spring, that memory rises in melt-fed streams, a reminder to balance convenience with kindness. Each region, each person, has a way to hear this memory and live by it. And finally, when we speak of the path to the sea, we realize the sea is the largest archive. Every river comes with its own alphabet, and when they merge, the sea does not erase them. It stores them and returns them as clouds, as rain, as dew on your roof. Tomorrow, a droplet will rest on a leaf in your yard, carrying a tiny part that was once salt at a river mouth. Moss scent on a rock, the warmth of a hand lifting water to stargaze. Water remembers the way to the sea, and the sky remembers the way to rivers. The cycle becomes a story with no beginning, no end. My dear friend, as night ripens and wooden houses along the river sit quiet like pages half closed, far away where highways cross the valleys, few notice how water's sound gathers into a century-long whisper. But if you've ever lived along the Mississippi, Hudson, Columbia, or Ohio, you know some sounds are like the kitchen clock, modest, persistent, reminding you that every current has a destination. Tonight we'll walk just a little further, not to uncover some noisy secret, but to recognize the tenderness of our very first line. Water remembers the way to the sea, and the sea is the great library that keeps every word the river has written. Science phrases this very gently. Water has no memory like humans do, but the river system with its winding shape, silt layers, oxbow lakes, inner bank sand levees, and outer bank scarps, preserves fingerprints of floods, droughts, freezes, and thaws. These fingerprints travel with the water as countless tiny records sliding downstream. At the estuary, where fresh meets salt, that memory does not dissolve. It is translated into another language. Gradients of salinity, temperature, color, the smell of suspended silt, the faint laughter of small creatures feeding at night in mangroves and marsh grass. Imagine the estuary as a warm kitchen where all flavors mingle. Light, fresh water, being less dense, glides above. Heavy salt water slips below, forming a quiet salt wedge. As winds shift, tides rise, moons wax and wane. The layers brush against each other, trading bits of salt and heat, like old neighbors trading stories over a fence. This exchange makes estuaries rich nurseries for birds, young fish, crabs, a small cradle between land and sea. And in every grain of suspended sediment is what you've heard all along, a fragment of remembered origin, a blurred but legible address. I came down from those pine hills, through that rock vein, stumbled at that bend, then was lifted by a June storm long ago. We often think of memory as stacked images. On the bay floor beneath an estuary, those images are thin mud layers. Year upon year, a narrow core would show them like tree rings, a storm season with coarser grains, a drought with fine dust, a distant wildfire sending black ash, a heavy snow melt year flushing more flow and paler mud. Here, not only does the river remember, the sea remembers on its behalf, storing everything in a silent library with no signs, yet open to those who can read. Do waters ever get lost? Someone asks, as softly as curtain cloth brushing the frame. Yes, sometimes a droplet slips into a deep aquifer and rests for years. Sometimes it rises as vapor, rides winds across continents, and falls on an unnamed step. But even in these detours, it carries the great narrative of its basin, where people dug canals and built dams, where roots held soil, where hills surrendered sand grain by grain. Memory is not in each droplet, but in the invisible map drawn by landforms, climate, living things, and our hands. You've sat on a porch and heard crickets sing when autumn comes. Now imagine farther off, ships stringing out warm yellow lights as they head to sea, and currents shifting like an old blues tune. Fast beats, slow beats, rests, then another phrase that is tide, wind, dense, cold water, creeping along the bottom, warm, fresh water on top like a thin blanket. Oceanographers call it stratification, mixing, diffusion. We hear an old land's slow exhale after dinner. In that moment, knowledge and story fuse. We understand more and worry less and sleep more deeply. If you ever wonder about water's time, lay a soft, hazy ruler along the flow. From a raindrop on an Appalachian roof to a warm southern bay weeks. From glacier melt on a high peak to the Pacific. Perhaps a season, from a soil grain on a hillside, eroded, carried, settled, re-eroded, and finally laid to rest in marine mud. Maybe a lifetime, many lifetimes. Water's time stretches like a string, and that elasticity creates the sense of memory. Past events still shaping the present. A flood 5 years ago may have left banks that make today's river gentler, tamer. A new reservoir may have muted this year's flood song. Fewer sediments, clearer water, fewer letters reaching the sea, and something endearing. When the sea welcomes rivers, it does not do so through a single door. Each mouth is its own living room, one green as cat's eyes over limestone, one brown as cocoa milk with silt, one foaming white over boulders. Along many American coasts, Salt marshes are spring mattresses for the shore, absorbing wave energy, trapping silt, stretching out the time it takes for letters to reach the sea so they can be read slowly. Walking the boardwalk through a marsh, brushing reeds with your hand. Tiny droplets cling to your fingers like braille. Each dot a small chapter of the great journey. Where do people stand in water's memory? The answer: very close, like librarians. When we allow rivers to spill over floodplains, they have places to store temporary memories. When we force channels arrow straight, pages are torn out. When we remove an old dam, the river finds lost chapters. In the Pacific Northwest, rivers freed from dams have welcomed salmon back, and with salmon come sediments, bars, the dear old pulse of a reclaimed story. These changes are not loud. They move step by step, like an elder walking at dawn, fingertips brushing tree trunks for balance. That rhythm suits the night. Slow, steady, reassuring. Now, gently close your fingers as if holding a paper boat. We set that boat in a small puddle after the rain in the backyard. It turns, it spins, it seeks, then quietly slips toward the drain. In a moment it knows the route, not because it remembers, but because the world around it is clear enough to guide. So it is with rivers. Their memory lies in channels carved by water and time into the land. When those grooves lead to the sea, the river does not hesitate. At the sea, the journey does not end. It changes name, from river flow into the vast ocean cycle, into currents that sink cold water deep, carry it between continents, bring it up far away, send it back to the sky. One day, those waters will return as rain on your eaves, tapping metal, whispering that they have seen schooling fish at estuaries, heard midnight ship horns, rested among cordgrass, and rocked in a quiet cove under a young moon. In the dark room, you hear the fridge's low hum, the wind touching the shutters. Listen deeper, and you'll hear water moving through pipes, walls, city. Somewhere, a gauge logs a small number. A researcher opens a graph and smiles at the hysteresis curve. A trace showing that today's flow still bears the imprint of the last flood. The words may be unfamiliar, but the feeling is close. Old events brushing gently against today, like a riverbank remembering where an oak once stood, and each high water still bending slightly around that absence. Do you remember the first time you saw the sea? For many who grew up in America's heartland, it came late, a long drive past cornfields and pastures, until the glass fills with the smell of salt, and the sound of waves becomes a certain voice. Standing before the ocean, it's easy to think, this is the end. Yet this end is precisely where the story continues. Vapor rises, clouds drift back toward the mountains you knew as a child, and the next rain begins a new letter. Science calls this the water cycle. Tonight, we give it another name, the memory loop. If you ever set a little boat on a river as a child, or simply listened to an old song on the radio on a long afternoon, you know the comfort of repetition. Not repetition as boredom, but as reassurance. Rivers repeat their motions. Touch the bank, retreat, leave a dark line of wet sand, like a footprint from someone dear. The sea gathers these lines into its immense archive, then returns them to land as morning fog, as summer rain, as a rainbow over fields. That loop, if you hear it, is like a goodnight phrase repeated by someone you love, hardly changed, yet warm every time. Let's speak a little of hope. Endings often want a promise. Hope here does not shout. It's the rustle of young mangrove leaves, the glow of a lone firefly under an awning, A short note about floodplain land given back to the river. A levee lowered so high, water has room to breathe. Native plants return to estuary shores to hold silt. Such small acts collect into a new memory, one where human handwriting weaves through nature's script. One day, our grandchildren will stand on the bank and say, "It seems the river knows its way," and smile because the sea is still there, holding open its green door in greeting. Now, if your eyelids have softened, let's set a few more images afloat to lull ourselves. A fishing boat with a single white light, casting a shimmering path across the water. A gull standing on one leg atop an old piling, a strand of algae marking the day's high tide. A distant lighthouse bell beating like the old heart of the town. Everything slows, as if waiting for one last page to slide into its envelope. What does that page say? Only a few words. We'll meet again, at the river mouth, in the next rain, in tomorrow night's story. So the ending doesn't close anything, it opens another path, wide enough for your memory, the river, and the sea to walk through together. If you sleep deeply tonight, it's because we've set aside all the heavy things on the bedside. Numbers, plots, arguments, and kept only one soft thread of flow. Science is still here, watching like a small oil lamp. The story, like a stream, simply carries you into dreams. Before we part, let me whisper one more thing, as between old friends. Tomorrow, if you cross a bridge, glance down to see what the water is doing. If it's curling into small vortices around a pier, that's the river, reading an obstacle. If one bank builds while the other erodes, that's the river recalling the curve it has drawn. If the water clouds after rain, that's the river telling of slopes upstream sending silt. All these acts of reading, recalling, telling will finally join into one simple sentence. When the river meets the sea. I remembered the way. Now, let your own memory place a small kiss on the river's memory, then gently let go. In your steady breathing, you'll sense a soft, bright strip opening far off, where the dark sea meets the sky. That is where tonight's story drifts. Tomorrow, the waters outside will still move, still remember, still write on, and we will meet again under the shelter of another quiet tale. Perhaps about raindrops, perhaps about wind, but surely with the same cadence, unhurried, warm, and trustworthy, because wherever we are, at whatever age, you and I both understand something that needs no loud announcement. Water remembers the way to the sea, and our hearts remember the way to peace. You can close your eyes now. Let your thoughts dissolve like mist. If your mind still wants to wander, let it keep going into the next video, where we'll go deeper into the mysteries of the soul. And if your body is tired, just let this sound rock you into sleep. No effort needed, only breathing. And remember, everything you're searching for is already resting quietly within yourself.